Hello and welcome back to the Motorsport Baithak podcast. I'm your host GD and joining me once again is my friend and your co-host Vedant. On this episode, we will be talking all about the F1 preseason testing. So let's grab some chai, take our seats, ready our opinions, and dive right into the conversation. Hello Vedant, how have you been? I just can't get over the fact that we finally had 24 hours of cars on tracks after a long winter break.
Hello, Divya. I've been great. Yeah, you're right. It's been a very long, but at the same time, it felt like it went away quickly, the winter break. And although the testing was 3 days, 24 hours in total, but the windy conditions and the sandstorm on day one essentially made it a 2.5 day test. So the cars had a lot of information to get from the testing, and we clearly don't know how the pecking order is.
Exactly. While the testing showed us what the teams have done, how they've developed their cars, but a lot of questions coming out of the 3 day limited test, unlike the usual 8 day test that we have. So I'm gonna throw it to you. What was the biggest talking point for you coming out of this F1 preseason test?
Well, firstly, since the 2020 regulations, the supposed to be 2020 regulations, the new era of Formula One was postponed to 2022 due to the COVID-19 financial impact. Formula One changed some technical regulations for 2021, and essentially it was a carryover of the car, but they made a few small changes. The floor of the car had to be narrowed, the diffuser had to be shortened, and there were some changes on the brake duct, on the
On the
rear
rear
brake
brake
ducts.
ducts, yep.
So the teams were primarily focused on that.
Even though it seemed like the changes wouldn't make a huge difference in performance or like in the pecking order, it seems that we were really wrong about that. Even these small changes have definitely shuffled it up. This might be a great season, an unexpected and exciting season that none of us would have expected. None of us would see coming, especially with what has happened with Mercedes and how strong Red Bull have been looking for the last 3 days.
Yeah, definitely. And Alpine's Martin Bakowski has said that it's not a midfield anymore, it's just a single field.
Absolutely.
And we are really getting that vibe from from the Formula One circus this season. So, what we're gonna do is let's start with the 2020 championship order and go down every team in that order.
All right, let's do this. So let's talk about Mercedes first. I haven't seen Mercedes in the last 6 years be so nervous, be so shaken per se. We were all expecting Mercedes to come out of the blocks like usual and just blitz testing, but really not just unexpected. Not just like surprising, but just I think I don't have a word for it. Just like
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So Mercedes did not have the best test, and as Will Buxton said, Mercedes are so perfect that even the slightest error seems too huge to us.
yeah, that's true, but there weren't just a slight error. There was like a flurry of errors on like both the technical side from the drivers, and there's so much in there that just seems that uh, we might see a chunk in the armor in this season for Mercedes.
Yeah, it's going to be a tricky season for them. So let's talk about what problems Mercedes had this in the test. So Valtteri Bottas couldn't complete his running for the morning of day one because he had a massive gearbox issue. His entire day was compromised due to the fact that Mercedes had to change that gearbox. He only got 6 laps of running on day one, and the fact being these for testing this season, there's only one car, so both the drivers are sharing one car. So it's very limited, and Valtteri Bottas essentially had only 2 days of running.
Absolutely, and he came out of that, and he also said, the car is snappy and unforgiving. which is something we heard about the Ferrari last year and even about Red Bull at times. And it seems Mercedes has come from like a stable rear end that Lewis would talk about last year to like something that he would now want. Um, Surprisingly enough, Sam Collins on the pre-testing show that was done after testing ended today said that they had expected Mercedes to encounter problems with the low rake solution that they've been using for the last few years after the regulation changed. Uh, and it did happen, and it took me by surprise, that Mercedes would still have that problem because we know they are a very good team. Um, and somehow Red Bull have found their footing, and they seem to be fast. They seem to have gotten rid of that snappy rear end that they had last year. And he rightly pointed out that Mercedes can't just switch to a high rake solution, even if they would have figured that these technical regulations would hurt them because it's not easy to just change the philosophy of the entire car from one year to another, especially since the regulations won't be stable. There's not much to it.
Yeah, and surprisingly, Mercedes haven't completed their shakedown yet.
They were
The
the
filming
only
days.
team who did not do a shakedown before the preseason
Exactly.
testing, and it's
And
hurt them, I think.
so it's a strange strategy they are using, but they have the shakedown on Tuesday, on the 2 days after testing. So hopefully they'll get their systems running in time for round one.
So let's talk about a little bit more about Mercedes and their issues with the power unit and the gearbox that they had over the season. Not just Mercedes themselves, but their customer teams, Aston Martin, Williams, and surprisingly the only team that didn't have an issue was McLaren, who are like new adopters of the Mercedes PU and the gearbox and everything else. So really surprising there with Mercedes coming out of the box and having issues with their power unit and the gearbox. Something that we have, something that Mercedes has been the leader in for the last 6 years, and especially with all those AMG stickers on the car this year, kind of surprising that they would have issue with that when they're
Yeah.
finally endorsing the very part of the team, that has led them to victories over the last few years.
Yeah, it's definitely strange, and but Mercedes did mention a lot during the preseason test that they are encountering issues with the power unit. Sorry, before the testing, in the press releases and in the postseason interviews and all that stuff, there was a lot of talk about Mercedes having issues with the power unit, but we sort of brushed that away because we know that Mercedes always downplayed their
Their strength, yeah,
performance coming into the season. So it was
absolutely.
you're absolutely right. It was very very strange seeing Mercedes suffer so much even before the season starts.
Absolutely, and this brings into question whether they will be ready in time for Bahrain. Like I'm pretty sure the next 2 weeks back at Brackley, they'll be working 24-hour shifts to get things right and running for the first race. But it still raises questions whether Mercedes took it too lightly or did the development they did not develop the car enough over the course of the last season, not just the PU itself, because they'll be carrying over that PU into the next years until 25. So we'll see how that pans out. But yeah, not looking for Mercedes. But let's move on to who we think will be leading the field when the lights go out on 28th of March in Bahrain in 2 weeks. Let's talk about Red Bull. Great 3 days for them. Not a lot of niggles. Sergio Perez looked good in that car. Max Verstappen was really happy. What do you think about it?
Yeah, definitely. Red Bull have been the most comfortable team during testing. Max Verstappen topped the timing sheets across the 3 days. Sergio Perez was P8, only a second behind Max. But that's like let's not dive
Let's not read
into
too
let's
much
not
into
read
that. It's
into
just been three
the
days,
timings.
yeah, and they
But
barely had any running per se.
but the fastest lap that Max Verstappen had was equivalent to the last season's P2 free practice 2 fastest lap. So like my question is, if the technical regulations wanted to slow the cars down and cut back the downforce, and Red Bull can match that fastest lap from last season, that timing from last season.
Yep.
Has the high rake system, has the high
Finally
rake
kicked in.
philosophy helped Red Bull in this
Absolutely. See,
regulations?
yeah, this is the same thing that we mentioned when we were talking about Mercedes, right? That I think the regulations have finally helped Red Bull, overcome its shortcomings in the hierarchy philosophy, and I guess unexpectedly so, because Sam Collins rightly pointed out in the testing post testing show that Red Bull haven't brought along like a lot of new bits, or you don't see massive changes on the Red Bull car, right? There's a few changes in the rear suspension and things as such, but nothing that sticks out. And I think the hard work's finally paid off, and Red Bull have finally found a happy place for their car per se. Where they know it's working, and the driver's happy too.
Yeah, and there was an interesting piece from the race. I think that Red Bull's rear suspension is slightly similar to what Mercedes used last year. So the placing of the rear wishbone is slightly similar to what Mercedes had last year, but definitely the high rake philosophy has helped Red Bull, and the Honda power unit up overhaul, which Honda has brought specifically for this season, because Honda wants to give their all before they leave Formula One. So I think that Honda power unit may be the best in the field right now.
Well, I don't know about that, but it definitely looks good for Honda, and it'll be heartbreaking, almost like it'll be great for them to win, but it'll also be a little heartbreaking to see them leave after winning this season. But I might be reading too much into it, because we know Mercedes is not gonna just let it go. They're gonna bounce back, and they're gonna bounce back really well. But other than that, one comment from Sergio Perez saying, that he understands why other drivers found it hard to drive that Red Bull, which again, reassures us that Red Bull is not an easy car to drive, and it's kind of difficult to adapt to that car, and maybe that car is built a little more around Max Verstappen, but like I said before, none of the drivers want a car that's hard to drive. Everybody wants a car that's easier to drive, but is still competitive. And I think it was Charles Leclerc in one of his like Instagram lives or in one of his interviews who pointed out, he was asked the question that would you have a car that's easier to drive or and less competitive, or would you want a car that's competitive but really hard to drive? And the answer was, obviously you want a car that's very competitive, even if it's harder to drive, and you want to give your best. So yeah, looking great for Red Bull, and we hope we'll see them start P1 and P2 to give Mercedes the nerves in 2 weeks time. But yeah, let's move on to the next team. Let's move on to McLaren. McLaren were running the Mercedes PU, but did not face any issues. They had a really smooth running. They were looking really comfortable. And a couple of talking points coming out of their team too. Let I want to hear what you have to say about McLaren first.
Yeah, McLaren was, in my opinion, the most consistent midfield runners. In a sense, they were the most consistent team after Red Bull. They didn't encounter any issues. They met their targets, whatever they wanted to test. But when we hear comments from Andrea Seidel, he said that they're not overjoyed by what they have, the feedback, but they're content with it. And I think that's a good way forward, because if you are overjoyed, in my opinion, if you are overjoyed by the results, that means your ambitions were not as high that as they should be, right? So
Exactly. And I mean, having a great preseason testing where you don't break down anything, you don't have a bad session. That's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it shows that the ultimate reliability of the car is really great, but on the other hand, as an engineer, you want things to break so you can fix it before the season starts. So, I mean, I'm hoping that there won't be issues for McLaren when the lights go out on the 28th of March, but they are definitely looking good. One interesting thing Sam Collins pointed out in the interview today, and that was McLaren have found a loophole in the new regulations So if you look at the McLaren Diffuser, the straights in the Diffuser, they're longer and they're not they don't have to comply with the length limit or like the height limit per the new regulations because of the way they have positioned the gearbox in the chassis or something like that. And it's really interesting, and a lot of teams will be looking at that over the course of the next couple of weeks before we hit the track again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The McLaren Diffuser is the talk of the town right now. But interestingly, Gary Anderson from the race pointed out that it is not a loophole, it is a completely legal interpretation, and it has something to do with, obviously, as you said, the positioning. Formula 1 cars have millimeters of, differences here and there.
Yeah, I mean, it's legal, but it's interesting to see McLaren make that innovation and not other teams. McLaren are the only team on the grid who've done that. So that's really interesting, and kudos to the engineers at McLaren who were able to uh, figure that out.
Another thing that struck me of the McLaren car was the McLaren does not have that bulge on the engine cover on the side profile, which Mercedes and Aston Martin and even Williams have. So it has something to do with a different packaging and a different bodywork structure. But it was interesting to see that a power unit having the same power units, these guys can create different packaging and all those structures.
Exactly, and yeah, and Dan Ricciardo looked comfortable in that car too. He had a few great sessions. He was on the top of the timing chart for a little bit, which showed that he is doing well in that team, and we can only wish the best for him. Yeah, so we'll see how that pairing with Lando goes, and we are hoping for the best. But let's move on. Who do we have next?
Aston Martin, formerly Racing
So
Point.
funnily enough, last year they were termed as a pink Mercedes, but this year they are the only team who have a brand new, per se, 2021 car. They use their tokens to create a new monocoque, and it is not like the Mercedes at all. So the Aston Martin is truly an Aston Martin and not a derivative car of like a Mercedes 2020 or something like that, as a lot of people may think.
Yeah, they changed, they updated their side pods and the side crash structure, but their nose is the same. Their front wing area is the same as last year. So it's a mix and match of, obviously, the 2021 cars are an evolution of the 2020 cars. So some parts will be similar, but the Aston Martin floor is in some ways a slightly toned down version of the Mercedes floor, which is a very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And we saw them struggle too. Vettel didn't seem exactly comfortable in that car driving on the circuit. And it's not like he got a lot of consistent running either with all the issues they were having with the PU, the gearbox, and whatnot. Lance Stroll did post a couple good laps, but at the end of the day, they finished 17th and 18th, I believe, today, right?
Today, on the final day, they were the slowest two cars, but Sebastian Vettel was the slowest overall on the 3 days. And Sebastian
Exactly, and that
Vettel completed the least laps out of anybody across the 3 days. He had a gearbox issue on the second day. He had a turbo issue on the third day. Both these components, Aston Martin have sourced from Mercedes, which in itself is a big question mark on the Mercedes. So it's a very very interesting event playing on.
exactly, and Sebastian Vettel didn't look very confident in the post testing interviews either. He was a little tentative. His answers weren't as he didn't seem as jolly as he usually is. So I think there's a lot on his mind right now. But I hope he can turn a page, and I'd say he should take a page out of Fernando's book, who even after his accident has come back and put in a lot of laps and a lot of good miles with the Alpine team. So yeah,
Definitely.
let's talk about Alpine now. They started the preseason testing. The car looks even better. The livery looks even better. on track, and I can't stop looking at it. Definitely the airbox stuck out. It's huge. Just sits on top of the car. But apparently there are benefits to it, and we saw Alpine didn't have any problems either. They're the only engine manufacturer who did not have a PU issue throughout preseason testing, which is really surprising because in the past we've seen Renault PUs be the talk of the town regarding reliability, with Red Bull having a lot of issues over the years, Christian Horner not being happy and finally switching to the Honda PU. And even last year, McLaren had issues with the Renault PU when they started off testing and even during the season. So, really good performance from Alpine. What do you have to say about it, Vedant?
Yeah, definitely. Alpine had a very comfortable run. Fernando Alonso, let me just say, after coming back from that accident, he has titanium plates on his jaw, which will be taken out through surgery after the season. But coming straight from that accident with no running in the car, on the first day he put in 128 laps, which was, I think, the most or the second most of anybody on that day, and which is tremendous.
It just shows to go how much grit and determination Fernando has and why he is still a contender on the grid. He's not just anyone who's come back to F1 for a couple of years. He's here to make an impact, and we should not count him out at any given point.
Exactly, and he ran consistently throughout the 3 days, 2 days he had, and like as you said, Alpine didn't have any issues. Their airbox certainly is very strange, but that is because they changed the positioning of some of the components from the side pods to behind the airbox, so the side pods are a little slimmer, and the airbox is more bulkier. A backside of it is that their center of gravity rises up. So I don't know how
But I'm
that.
pretty sure they've taken all of that into account, while making those changes.
Yeah,
And some
obviously.
people might even think, the frontal area of the car has increased, so there will be more aerodynamic drag. But at the same time, the frontal area of the side pods has decreased, and they're able to channel more air over their floor, which is allowing them to create that downforce. Uh, Maintain similar levels of downforce as last year, or like claw back that downforce that they may have lost because of the regulation change. So it seems like they're doing well. The pace seemed good. Esteban Ocon seems especially happy after the first day of running, even though he was not too happy about the sand in his face and on his overalls.
Yeah, there was a lot of sand, and as we said, there was a sandstorm, and the running got like there was not a lot of running on the first day, but Alpine had a pretty decent day. The airbox looks like a 1976 Ligier, the
Yep,
big bulgus airbox.
that has
So,
been the word around the paddock so far. But yeah, great stuff from Alpine. Let's move on to Ferrari. A little all over the place. Not the smoothest start for Carlos Sainz or Charles Leclerc. Seemed a little bit twitchy on the first day, but they settled into sort of a rhythm. Even though they had niggles, they were able to get quite a few laps in. What do you think about it? I don't know what to think about Ferrari at all, except the fact that the PU definitely looks better than last year. Even Kimi Raikkonen said, the Ferrari power unit seems better, and even Mattia Binotto came out and said the straight line pace disadvantage is not as much as last year. But still, it's hard to draw a conclusion from where Ferrari stand in the pecking order or how their performance seems to be.
yeah, definitely. And so Ferrari was the only car that had a on track issue. The only car that got stuck on track because of a technical issue, really, and that was on the first day. So after that, it was relatively smooth sailing for them. Carlos Sainz was third on the timing sheets at the end of the 3 days. Again, we can't read too much into that, but it was a relatively better testing for them than the season before. We can just hope, that they have made that improvements that they promise. those improvements are not very visible right now. The straight line speed is not very visible right now, but we can just hope. Alfa Romeo was uh, putting in some quick laps during the course of the series.
Yeah, I think a lot of people pointed out that when Charles and Kimi were on track doing like race simulations, they had similar pace, which was kind of surprising, and people thought that Ferrari might have not made a step forward. But it's hard to say, what plans they were exactly on. Even though we might know the tires, they might be just running different engine modes. We just can't draw a conclusion, and we know, Ferrari is a factory team, and we will expect them to be much faster than Alfa Romeo. But before we talk about Alfa Romeo, let's talk about Alfa Tauri. Now they seemed to be faster than we've ever seen them before. They seem to have made a great step forward. Pierre Gasly came out and said the car feels much, much better than last year. And Yuki Tsunoda seemed really comfortable in that car too. Put in some huge amount of laps in through the 3 days. They had a couple issues, but mostly smooth sailing for them throughout preseason testing. And I think they might just be moving up or like even closer to that midfield, to Alpine, to McLaren
McLaren,
and to Aston
yeah,
Martin. They seemed in really good shape, and Yuki Tsunoda is looking really good in that car.
definitely. So Yuki Tsunoda's pre-testing runs at Misano and at Imola has helped him a lot to catch up to Formula One, and he has showed that he has that talent, and it is not just a typical Red Bull power boost up the rankings. It is a proper selection
He's a
of
proper
talent.
talent in F1.
Exactly,
Yep, absolutely.
just like Max Verstappen was when he joined Formula One at 17 years of age. So Yuki Tsunoda has been sensational. He posted the second fastest time, and for me personally, the best part of the 3 days was at the end of the third day, during the last 1 hour. Yuki Tsunoda and Max Verstappen were constantly putting on fast laps and breaking the fastest lap of the day, and that was something very, very interesting to see, and to see that Yuki Tsunoda is so quick in that AlphaTauri.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think the best part of me was every time Yuki would step out of the car and give an interview, he'd always be smiling. He'd always be in good spirits, and that always put a smile on my face to see Yuki so comfortable. But that also goes to speak for the team that AlphaTauri is, and the cars they've been producing for the last 3 years, even though they are a Red Bull sister team, and they follow a similar philosophy. It's it goes to show that the cars produced by AlphaTauri um, is is a driver's car, for the lack of better words. Drivers seem to be really comfortable with that car, no matter who you put in that car. They always come out on top. It gives like the car basically enhances the driver's capabilities almost. Makes them feel really comfortable and lets them take on the challenge from the very get go. Um, so yeah, I think AlphaTauri have done a great job, and I can't wait to see them score some points this season.
Definitely. So Franz Tost during the launch said that they want to be P3 in the championship, right? And I know we all were laughing on that comment, like not laughing, but we knew that AlphaTauri will not be P3, but I won't be surprised if they compete for it
Exactly,
after the
and
testing performance.
especially if Yuki Tsunoda can be up there with Pierre Gasly, and if they can help each other, if they can drive each other throughout the season, we might just see AlphaTauri score a lot more points, and maybe even just shuffle up that midfield pack even more. But yeah, we can only speculate for now. We'll see how it turns out at the first race in 2 weeks' time. Let's talk about Alfa Romeo now. They seem to have made a good step. They seem from last year. They seem to have caught up, with the rest of the midfield. Last year it was pretty clear that Alfa Romeo, Haas, and Williams were much behind the midfield pack per se. Alfa Romeo has seemed to made a step forward and caught up with that midfield pack. A different nose for them too, and a few changes here and there. Great livery, must say. But all in all, it's looking promising for both Kimi Raikkonen and Antonio Giovinazzi.
Yeah, definitely. Alfa Romeo has been on the up for the last few years, and with that new power unit, new Ferrari power unit, they finally have that potential, to compete with with AlphaTauri and with the midfield ahead. Last season, we noticed that sometimes the Ferrari power unit was holding Alfa Romeo back, and I think this season it would be a much faster car for them. We saw them post consistently good laps in testing. There was some speculation that the Alfa Romeo were running higher power modes for Ferrari in the power units, but again, we can't say the real performance what the real performance is due to the fuel loads and the tires. But it's been a very interesting and very productive 3 days for Alfa Romeo.
Exactly, and I'm hoping Antonio Giovinazzi can score some more points this season. So we'll see how it pans out for them. Let's talk about Haas. We already know Haas is not going to be developing the car. They haven't done much work from last season either. They've just adapted, I guess. Done the minimal amount of work that they thought was fit for the season, and they'll be concentrating on the 2022 car. But Mick and Mazepin both seem to be on equal footing. They didn't have a lot of troubles, but not much to say other than that.
Yeah, so Haas has not used their tokens even, so
Exactly.
they have not done a lot of development on the car, and they have explicitly said that they won't do any development on this car. So I won't be surprised if they are dead last in the championship at the end of the year. But having said that, Mick and Nikita have shown potential. They have been consistent, and Gunter Steiner said that the main aim for testing for these two guys were to learn things and to get to know how Formula 1 works and all that stuff. And he was surprised at the amount of feedback these two rookies can give. So it's a positive 3 days. It's been a positive 3 days for Haas. Even though they don't have a huge potential going forward in this year.
Another thing coming from Haas. So Haas has used those Venetian blinds on their bargeboard sides for the last few seasons, and we saw Haas not using those elements anymore. We didn't see those elements on the car during pre-season testing this year, whereas most of the other teams have adapted that. And Sam Collins pointed out that those elements on the car are really sensitive and usually get damaged when there's contact between two cars on the racetrack. And Haas have learned that the hard way, and so will the other teams throughout the course of the season. So it'll be really interesting to see how that pans out for all the other teams, and what maybe the Haas technical team has to say about it.
Yeah, and on the technical side, Haas have finally brought that cape behind the nose cone. So they are the last team to do so, and they are finally caught up with the pack. So it might affect performance, but other than that, there's nothing new on the Haas.
Exactly. Now let's move on to the last team, Williams. Surprisingly, put Roy Nissany in the car on the first day, not letting their drivers run all 3 days of testing, even though we all know how essential it is. But one can obviously see that this was done because of financial reasons. But nevertheless, didn't have a lot of troubles. Williams had, like, for the first time in the last couple of years, they have had a really smooth testing, showed up on time, were the first ones out on the track, and put in a lot of laps, and hopefully we'll see them move up the order.
Yeah, definitely. So Roy Nissany, as you said, the only reserve driver only test driver. In fact, he's not even a reserve driver. He's a test driver. So only test driver to to participate in the test. It's a very strange thing that happened, but in a way, because of the sandstorm on day one, as we mentioned earlier. So George Russell's or Nicholas Latifi's program didn't get affected that much. Otherwise, it would have been a little bit shaky for them. But George Russell was quite quick. He was P6 in the overall time sheet. He participated only one day. So
But I guess like for the Williams, the time does not matter right now for this season at least. How fast they are, as long as they're making the step in the right direction, because rules are going to change next year. But we know that Williams, the very fact that Williams were able to show up on time and carry out their testing program as they wish to, goes to show that they are making steps towards where they want to be, and hopefully we'll see a resurgence from that team. But yeah, that was preseason testing over the last 3 days. Anything else from you, Vedant, that you want to talk about? Anything that stood out to you from preseason testing that we may not have touched upon so far?
I think we didn't touch on Aston Martin's front brake ducts, I believe. So Aston Martin's front brake ducts were the talk of the town last season because of the whole pink Mercedes saga. They have the rights to use the Mercedes brake ducts from last year without spending any tokens. But what they did was they brought their own brake ducts on day one. They tested them out, and on day two,
Reverted back to the 2020 spec.
it was very interesting to see them do that. And I don't know what they'll use going forward, but an interesting development.
But one more thing that we didn't mention throughout the podcast, we talked about Mercedes time and again. We didn't talk about the seven-time world champion doing something that we don't ever see him do, and then that is spinning again and again. Spun on day two, and I think he also spun on day three, right? That goes to show again
Oh
where
yes.
Mercedes are with that car. That car is not responding well to the drivers. Up until last year, we saw the drivers of Mercedes just, you know, run the car the way they wanted to. Not much, overcorrection while they were driving. They had to correct the car again and again. But Lewis and Valtteri looking really uncomfortable in that car. And yeah, I don't know how I just forgot about it.
Yeah, I think we forgot about it because we don't usually, we don't have that in our mind. We know that Mercedes is perfect, that Lewis is essentially perfect. So yeah, it was very strange seeing him, spin out and almost crashing into Nikita on twice.
Yeah, exactly. And Nikita Mazepin and Max Verstappen also had an incident when Max Verstappen was trying to go for a flying lap in the closing minutes of the final session on day three, and Nikita Mazepin was sitting essentially on the apex of turn one. Uh, Not great. And we also saw Carlos Sainz and Kimi Räikkönen make contact on track towards the closing minutes of the same session. So yeah, a lot going on and a lot to look forward to. I just can't wait to come back in 2 weeks' time and like go racing, and I am so pumped for it. So yeah, thank you, Vedant, for all your thoughts on preseason testing, and I just can't wait to see us shaken up. I think it's going to be a great season. I think the pecking order is not clear now, and it's not going to be clear anytime soon either. I think we're going to see the pecking order develop throughout the season, and the first few races, we're going to have some surprise podiums, we're going to have some surprise breakdowns, we're going to have some exciting things going, and I think I can promise you that.
So talking about surprise podiums, let me just say, the last time Ferrari hired a Spanish driver, the first race of the season was at Bahrain, and that Spanish driver won the race.
All right, let's keep our fingers
That was
crossed.
Fernando Alonso. It is too optimistic. It is not at all realistic. But I'm just saying, surprise podiums. We saw Pierre Gasly win a race last season. We saw Sergio Perez win a
Hey,
race
I,
last season.
I, I told you we're gonna have at least five surprise podiums this year in our predictions podcast. So it seems like it's gonna come more than just true. Maybe this is when Mercedes fails. I don't know. I just don't know what to think. It's been a great preseason testing, a lot of excitement. And yeah, there's a lot more content coming out. Drive to Survive coming out on March 19th. So stay tuned for that. We'll be doing an episode, basically a review and our reactions to Drive to Survive, and I think it's going to be a spicy one because there's never been so much drama in the F1 paddock as last season. And I think this season is going to top all of that too. Just can't wait for it. So yeah, thank you, Vedan. Thank you for being here. It was great talking to you. And we'll catch you in a week's time. Thank you for listening, everyone.